Today I sat down with someone that is arguably one of the most informed people on the planet when it comes to guitar amplifier tones. He's owned and put through the paces a ridiculous number of amps, ranging from highly sought after boutique amps all the way to coveted vintage amps from the best years. He is, of course, Jonathan Sullivan, aka HW, the man behind ToneJunkies, which offers probably the most popular Kemper profiles in the world. In this video, we talk about a number of topics ranging from Kempers, of course, to profiling, the many variables in tone, pedal hype, praise and worship, and of course the Line 6 Helix, and so much more. It's a great conversation. I think you guys are going to really enjoy this. I've added chapters to the video below so you can jump around to the topics you're most interested in, but I'd encourage you to listen to the whole thing. There's a lot of gems hidden throughout. All right, let's get to the interview. What's up, guys? Today I'm joined by a very special guest, Jonathan, aka HW of ToneJunkies. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining me today.
What's up, man? How you doing?
I'm doing well. I know you're a very busy guy, so I appreciate you taking some time out. Grab a cold beverage.
It's no problem. Yeah, it's a diet Dr. Pepper and cream soda.
Wow, I've never heard of that.
I know, it's kind of a weird invention. I found it at the store the other week, and it sounds better than it is. It's not that good.
Well, I'll virtual cheers you with my water here.
Mm-hmm. Cheers.
All right. So there's quite a few reasons why I wanted to do this with you. Obviously, it should be obvious. You are Mr. Kemper, more or less. Kemper is your bread and butter. So obviously, there's a lot we can talk about there. Hopefully, you can see on screen. I've got my Kempers here on the desk.
I see them.
Yeah, so that's always there. That's not just for you. That's kind of
right.
My desk setup. So that's reason one. But reason two is, I think what goes with that is almost more interesting, at least to me, the fact that you have profiled and owned and demoed probably more amps than just about anyone on this planet. And if it's not that, you're getting closer to that. And I think that's really fascinating to me. So,
well, I'm on a mission.
Yeah.
I started just profiling amps, and it seemed like a cool thing to do. And then I talked to a guy named Gary V, and he told me, how did he put it? He said, pick something that you can never really complete, like something you can't ever really finish. And so I thought, okay, well, I'll just profile every amp in the world.
As any sane person does.
Yeah, exactly. And, people ask me all the time, like, aren't you going to run out of amps? Even Michael Britt asked me the other day, have you run out of amps yet? I thought that for some reason that was way funnier than like anybody else asking, because I still find myself getting amps going, oh man, Michael Britt already did this amp in like pack 4, pack 3, or whatever pack he did it, and he's done a lot too. But no, I'm on a mission to profile the whole world. And, in a way, it's become like a curation, a digital curation project. There's a lot of young players that they're just jumping right into digital, and they didn't start with tubes and that whole thing. And so in a way, how does anyone know what a steel string singer sounds like, or an ODS or something? I mean, I've never played real Dumbles, so I'm relying on the clones. And if you haven't even played the clones, you're just relying on what someone says or a YouTube video. So in a weird way, being able to play the profiles, it preserves the sound in a way. And I think especially with like some of these old Fenders, like there's Fenders from 48 and 49. And I've tried. There's no examples of like original condition ones, and people didn't treat them well. And what do those things really sound like? Well, we have a guess, but the Kemper provides an interesting way of like preserving the tone of things forever, I think, which is a cool thing.
Yeah, I completely identify with that, because what drew me to the Kemper was exactly that. The fact that I've never played a real AC30 before. I played an AC15, whether it be a Chinese one or, a 62 or something. I've never played one. I don't know anyone that owns one. And so for me, when am I going to get the chance to, get a 100-pound amp, carry it up the stairs to my apartment and be able to play it? It's never going to happen. So for me, I looked at the Kemper like, well, here's a chance. I had a Helix. I think before I got the Kemper, I had the Helix for about 2 years. And so the Helix, so I know what the AC30 and the Helix sounds like. I know what various modelers sound like, but I've never played a real AC30. So I can't sit here and go, it sounds just like an AC30 because I've never played one.
Right, sure.
So for me, the draw with the Kemper was going, well, wait, this is supposed to be, pretty much as close as you can get to a 1-to-1 of the actual amp in question. I want to hear for myself, what does an AC30 sound like?
Right.
What does, vintage tweed, what does, and obviously the list goes on and on. So for me, the Kemper was kind of that gateway where I could go, listen, I know I'm never going to be able to play these real amps. I mean, maybe I will someday, but, it doesn't seem likely, especially something like the steel string Singer, like you mentioned. Those are amps that most people will never be able to play. So the Kemper has a huge draw.
Yeah, I think there's 12 steel string Singers or something, like maybe 15. So, and some are
John Mayer probably
for.
has half of them.
He does actually. He has like 4 or 5. But he may have more. He's got And then number 1 is SRVs, and they don't really know what happened to it. They think Jimmy has it. They think his brother Jimmy has it, but
that makes sense.
Nobody really knows. Pretty much the people who have them are John, one or two other people, and then the people they were originally made for.
Yeah.
The owners that never sold them. Yeah, what you're saying is so true, man. It's in this process, I've been able to buy and just acquire so many amps, and they pass through my fingers. I can't keep them all, so they're sort of here with me for a little bit, enough to get to know them, to profile them, and get them out. But it's an incredible, rich history of like tone, and they're just these weird, fascinating machines, that they really are from another time, but we've hung on to them, and it's like this piece of the past, and in some cases, in some ways, it's kind of like the guitars too, You see a Strat, and it's like, is it vintage looking? Is it modern looking? It's sort of just this timeless thing, and a lot of the amps are. The components of them, I mean, people don't think about this, but, they're covered in Tolex and tweed because that's what they made suitcases out of, and they just made them to look like suitcases. Like, people carry briefcases. Now they'll carry an amp. And it was just total, they're made of wood because that's what was around. And the plexis were plexiglass because nobody had invented plastic yet, and they used some metal, but metal's heavy and it was kind of expensive. It's just like, you just used what you had around. I mean, it really is like the way they make a crate amp today, or I shouldn't even say crate amp. The way they make a Helix or a Kemper, it's made out of like modern material, It's like plastic. No one gets upset that it's plastic or whatever because that's just what we use to make stuff. It's a weird it's a weird world, tube amps, and people have weird attitudes towards them, and they're big and heavy and loud, and they break all the time, but they're wonderful. They really are. I'm a big fan of tube amps.
Yeah, there's so much you just said that I want to get into. So you kind of alluded to a lot of stuff, but I will say what I love watching, what I love about your videos is you can really see that you are 100% a romantic about the gear. You love the gear, you respect the gear, you love the history. Clearly, you know a lot about the history. And for me, I totally identify with that. I am, I have never ever seen a company name, a brand that I identify with more than ToneJunkie. Like that is me to a T. And I'm sure, most people watching this probably fall within that. We are tone junkies. We love focusing and probably spending way too much time thinking about and tweaking tone. I mean, that's so important to us. So I really appreciate it. I really enjoy that side of it from you because it's not a clinical this and that kind of thing from you. It's very much romanticized, which I think is cool.
Yeah, thank you, man. When I first moved out of my parents' house, I moved in with these roommates, and one day my roommate came in and commented. He said, "Man, every single night I walk by your room," and this is when like desktops were more prevalent than laptops were around, but people still had desktops a lot, and I'd be at my little computer desk, and he was like, "Man, every night I walk by, you are just like researching guitar stuff." And now I look back and I go, if I could give myself advice back then, it would have been, don't don't go to college and like, think you're going to go on some road to like work for companies and stuff. And I studied marketing and stuff, but just go work with guitars. Clearly that's the only thing you're into. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If I could talk to young HW, that's what I would tell him. But it all ends up where it's supposed to. And there are definitely moments where I'm like, man, this is the best job ever. I can't believe this is my job right now, and it's just surrounded by cool vintage stuff. And I love it. I love it so much. The problem I have is I don't want to get rid of anything, because even if I don't play it, I just like looking at it. Like you could see these shelves up here. I just bought a bunch of Electro Harmonics pedals because I think they're like better looking than paintings. The old graphics and like the Pulsar and everything. They're just beautiful stuff. I really am romantic. Thank you for noticing.
Yeah, I often say that I look at guitars as functional art. That's kind of been something I've been saying for a long time. I don't know if you could even see it behind me here, but I've got all of my guitars out on a rack there. Some people like to keep them in the case the whole time. For me, there's a couple of reasons why I don't do that. One would be if I put it in the case, it's going to be hard for me to want to pull out and play it.
Sure.
Two, I like being able to say I'm tracking something. I like to be able to just think, oh man, the 345 would sound great on this, and just grab it and just do it. Mm-hmm. But then three is I love just being able to look at them. I mean, I don't really have anything else going on in the room. It's pretty much just guitars and amps. That's pretty much about it, and it's not always the safest having them out. We've had a couple run-ins with the Roomba taking out the guitars and stuff like that. But it's worth it for me.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. They're beautiful instruments, and they belong out. Yeah,
definitely. So I have a bunch of questions. I think it would only be right if we start with the Kemper. I have very briefly dabbled in profiling. I went to a friend's studio one time, brought the Kemper along because they wanted to see how legit it was. And so we profiled a couple amps they had there, and it was amazing. We were in the control room, we did the A/B, and it was pretty much identical. It blew us away. And I think the studio ended up buying a couple Kempers after that. Yeah. So that was pretty much my only experience. And I've never been able to do it again. So profiling, to me, there's a lot of almost mysticism to it. I know you've done some great videos kind of explaining some tips and tricks, what you do, the processes. But before getting into that, I'm just curious, do you know the number off the top of your head of the amount of amps you've profiled up to this point?
I don't. And what's interesting, I think the Suze would know, who's sort of my counterpart. I think he knows, but I've lost track because I don't have them all sitting anywhere. I mean, I could go even in the everything pack. I've got this everything pack bundle that doesn't have all the free stuff in there.
Right.
So I'd have to go look, but I think we accidentally blew way past 100 packs, and I was supposed to like celebrate it or something, but I didn't notice. I thought at one point it was 75, and then someone told me they counted 110. That was a while ago. So I don't know if we're at 150. We're between 100 and 150, I'm sure. And some of the packs, had early on I did a couple dual amp packs, and just a couple, we called them, profile pack 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah.
And they had 5 or 6 amps in there. So it's tough. I'm not even sure. I'd have to count them, but look, there's always amps in the world. And the thing I've gotten into as time has gone on, originally I started and I looked at what Michael Britt was doing, and he's a really big fan of the Classic Lead 80 speaker. And in fact, probably the vast majority of his catalog is through that Classic Lead 80. When it's something like a Vox, he'll do the Classic Lead 80 and some vintage appropriate speakers. I really like greenbacks, but I just really to me, speakers are a big part of the tone. And so as the years have gone on, I've gotten a lot more into speakers and just miking technique and position and stuff. And, not that I try to do a million things, but slowly you just gravitate towards doing something a little differently, and you enjoy what that brings to it. And different speakers are very different. I just got done using some Electro Voice speakers, those big EVs, and man, what you do with mics on those things is way different than like how I would mic a greenback. And
Yeah.
because sometimes, and I've got my core speakers that I love, but to me, it's like the amps, the cabs, they all like work together. So to me, it's like, even though I've done 100 or 150 or something amps, now the possibilities go like, oh, but I just got this new 1969 Marshall cab with 412, like four.
Right,
I didn't put that amp through this, and it's a totally different thing. And lately, I've been trying to do amps that we profile through like 3 different speakers, 3 completely different ones, and that produces enormous packs, So the world is the goal, and I think 100 or 120 is what we've done,
So, couple questions just real quick. When you're profiling, how much does the cab play a role in the profile? Obviously the speaker's got to be the vast majority of the sound you're getting, but say you're profiling the same speaker in a 112 or a 412, a greenback, is it 90% speaker, 10% cab? What would you say the split is?
Well, I think the physics of it are there's always an effect, but the closer you are to that one speaker, I think the less effect the number of speakers is going to have.
Right.
Now, I've never really A/B tested, like, let me take the exact same speaker in a 112, mic it up at 12 inches, and then, or whatever, 6 inches or 1 inch, whatever, and then mic it up again, same speaker in a 412, So I've never really done like the clinical A/B. But, the cabs are cabs. People pay a lot of attention to them. To me, I've heard of all sorts of crazy studio tricks, in terms of miking the back of a 412 just to get a little rumble out of it and stuff and all. But for me,
and all that.
Yeah, and for me, it's more about the speaker itself. But speakers also sound different than each other, which is something I've learned now firsthand, which you wouldn't think. But maybe they age differently, maybe they're constructed differently. I think in general, manufacturing is like a lot better today. So now you probably get a bunch of speakers and they sound the same. But I would say half of the Fender amps that I've run across that have multiple speakers from the blackface or silverface era, the speakers sound different. The brighter,
like a 212 or something.
Yeah, exactly. The right and the left speaker sound just different. And and who knows why that is? It could be they're in the middle of failing, or the cone was made on a different day. It's really different. So I think the cab it's all the things together, and that's when it's hard to parse out like what is one. It's really hard to isolate the variables. But at the end of the day, it's just about good tone. If it sounds good and you like it, that's the thing.
Yeah, for sure. I think me and you are probably pretty similar in that we can get into the nitty gritty and go very deep into that kind of stuff, and then every once in a while we got to pull ourselves back out and go, how much of this really matters? How much am I spending way too much time on this when I should be focusing more on the things that matter, such as playing, or how much is going to come across in a mix? That's a whole other conversation that we can have. There's so many more variables to it. But I just as kind of an outsider, all of the little nitty gritty stuff is really fascinating to me about the profiling process. Go ahead.
I was going to say it all has an effect. Like I remember a while ago, you and me talking about some profiles of one of the Morgan packs, and you were saying how airy it felt on the top end compared to other stuff. I don't remember. You remember what pack that was?
Probably the Abbey. I think that's one of my favorites.
The Abbey. There. Yeah. It was, and I remember at the time what I was doing was I had built a room, and I have like an amp room, like a speaker room.
Yeah.
And I had framed it and built it and everything. And at the time, I was experimenting with pulling the mics further and further back. And I guess the sound was bouncing off the wood floor because the rest of it was all, padded and everything. And it's like the more I experimented with different stuff and pulling that thing back and moving it really was producing a big difference. You know what I mean? So the nitty gritty, I think, makes minimal differences, but at some point it all starts to add up. And now I haven't been doing that at all. Like I've been doing a completely different technique that I feel is working great, but I haven't been doing as many like voxy chimey things either. So, yeah, I'm fascinated at how just crazy a speaker cone is, and how it puts out different frequencies, and then you put these little dumb mics all around it, and it's all changing, and it's mostly luck, man. I mean, it's mostly luck. You know, it's really hard to reproduce. I try to, if I get a really great sounding setup, sometimes I go like buy an amp just because I'm like, don't move the mics. I don't want, like, I did that with a couple Morgans one time. I set up the Abbey, and I think I went and bought another Morgan amp that I thought would be appropriate with the same cab and everything. And like, as soon as it got here, I profiled it right away because I didn't want to take the setup down.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So I'm curious about kind of the process you do for profiling. So how much time do you spend with the amp before you profile it? And what is that process exactly?
It depends. So it's all different. It's sort of evolved over time as I've like taken over different spaces and stuff too in the house. So I moved into this place that I'm in and like 4 years ago. And originally I was just in this room and doing everything in this room. And you can see on my YouTube channel when I was doing all the videos in this room, and then I built another set out there. And I say out there because it's like this direction, like here is the rest of the basement floor of the house. And it like walks out into the backyard and stuff. But I've just recently, you know, probably in January, I just told my family I'm taking over this whole basement. You know, you got the rest of the house. And all the kids want to do is play video games anyway. So they still come hang out, but
works out.
Yeah. So now when I get an amp, I'm usually just trying it out in the other room for a while where I've got a bunch of amps set up and a bunch of cabs and stuff. And I get to know it a little bit, and I'm just trying it out, trying to figure out what this amp is about. And then I'm usually dragging it into putting a cab or whatever cab's already in the booth. Then I just sit right here in this spot and I'm really particular about like how this thing is set up around me, because this is where I play guitar the most. I play the Kemper through an FR that's sitting right down here. And so I'm very used to hearing guitar right here in this spot. And to me, it's not really important what's the best sounding thing. What's important is that like you control as many variables as possible, and that you try and make as many things consistent as possible. So I've heard a lot of amps and stuff by sitting right here. So in order for me to compare them to each other, I want to stay in the same spot with the speaker right in the same spot. So once I get to know the amp and I figure out what I like about it or what I want to capture, what would be cool, maybe I try some different speakers. Once I get it in the booth, I sit right here and I try to acclimate myself to like similar sounds. So maybe I pull up some old Matchless stuff if I'm doing a Vox, or I pull up some old Vox profiles and I just play it and I just familiarize myself with the high end, how bright it was or whatever. And then I just go from there. And my tastes change, you know? You know, you just, I don't know. I don't know. It seems like over the months, things can get brighter or darker or more mid-rangey or not. I just did I don't know. I just did a Trainwreck and the Z-Wreck recently, and some people were going kind of nuts, like whatever you're doing, and I'm like, I don't know what it is. It's just it's mostly the same stuff, you know.
Yeah.
I have employed a couple new tricks. I started using some outboard EQs a little bit, but I'm using them very little, really just to take down some of the feeling of directivity when a mic is right on a speaker as opposed to turning it. But, you know, if anything, I just cut a little 20 or 16K just to take some of the extra harshness off. But yeah.
Yeah, it's so interesting you say that, because I find it's completely true. Like when I'm creating tones to play for a track or making Helix patches or whatever, I take a minimum of a week to try and, like, if I have the luxury of being able to do that, because I find that depending on the time of day, whether it's night, I'm tired or not, there's so many variables to it, and my taste completely changed. You know, I go back to the first stuff I did, you know, that I loved and even recorded really well, and then I go back and listen, I'm like, that is not me anymore. You know, my tastes have totally changed. And the same thing happens with guitars. You know, I feel like for me, I enjoy having a bunch of different guitars for a lot of reasons. We can get into that later, but I love the variety, but also I don't really go one to one to one to one like within a week span. It's more like I have one guitar that's my one guitar for like a month or something.
Yeah.
That's pretty much all I use, and I just really dig that guitar. And then I'll pick up a different guitar and be like, oh, I totally forgot how amazing this guitar is. It's like having a brand new guitar all the time. It just cycles through. And then, my taste might change from the 345, which is darker, to the Jazzmaster, which is the opposite end of the spectrum. And suddenly my ears changed. And then to kind of tie it in with Kemper, it's really interesting to me because you're able to pull up such a wide range of amps, just completely different amps. And you can be playing them. And if you're just scrolling through, you're going to hate probably 80% of the profiles you run into. If you're just going one to the next, to the next, to the next, because your ears are used to whatever you were playing before. And then everything after that is such a drastic change. You go from a 65 Deluxe Reverb. It's got the cab itself, it's a very iconic sound, just the way the mids are scooped. It's its own thing. And you compare that to a Plexi, or even if they're set similar gain levels, it's just very different. And it can be, I think it's the mid-range specifically for me that really like, whoa, that's different. And I really don't like that. Or, and then if I just stick with it for 5-10 minutes, I'm like, oh, I'm really digging this. This is great. And then the reverse happens.
Yeah, you're 100% correct. I mentioned earlier acclimating myself like to the highs and lows of profiles, and it's for that reason exactly. It's funny, you said deluxe reverb, and you said the way it's scooped, and in my head I was thinking, oh yeah, because it's mid-rangey, because the deluxe verb is mid-rangey only compared to a twin. You know what I mean, right? But it's not mid-rangey at all, right?
Yeah.
But my brain immediately went to like the Fender family. But yeah, it's nowhere near as mid-rangey as a amp that has any significant mid-range. All the Fenders are scooped. That one with its, depending on the speaker, if it's like a Jensen, you'll get the most sort of honk, Whereas, and then you go to a twin or something, and it's like, oh my gosh, where did all this presence come from? And this hi-hat with a bright switch and everything. Yeah. No, and that's 100%, man. I've had the feel exactly what you're describing. I'll go back to a pack. I'll be playing something, and maybe I'll get used to a Tweed amp, like a Tweed profile,
Yeah.
And then I had this experience where I pulled up my own 65 Deluxe Reverb profiles, and I was like panicking. I was like, oh my gosh, I released this? Oh my gosh, like why didn't anyone tell me this was so terrible? But the more I just sat there and played, after like 2 minutes, you're like, man, this sounds great. And then you go back to something else, and it's like, why is this woofy and dark and everything? And no, the ear gets used to things. And what you're experiencing there is a phenomenon that wasn't possible in the analog world.
Right.
You could only change a speaker as fast as you could run over to something, unplug it, turn it off. And I think that's enough time to sort of reset.
For sure.
This flicking through, and man, you and me could talk about IRs, because I've made some IRs. I have a bunch more IRs in the hopper. I get a lot of requests now for IRs. People talking about IRs as being good or bad to me is like, it's the most ridiculous conversation. Like, just those words, like, or when people say I have an IR that sounds good with everything, it's like, no, you don't. You just don't. It's not possible. We're taught, it'd be like saying you have look, you could wear like a good pair of running shoes, and it could work in almost every situation. Right? You could walk in them. They might be casual enough. You could wear them with jeans. You could take them to the beach and you'd be okay. But you could not put on a tuxedo, Yeah. You could not, and it would be weird if you showed up and you were like, you went to the pool and you couldn't take them off, and you jumped in the pool. There are, no matter how versatile something is,
totally,
it doesn't matter. There's always a time where it's just completely inappropriate. And to me, when I listen to a Celestian Blue, whether it's an IR or a real speaker, and then I listen to an EV, an Electro Voice, those speakers could not be more different. And they can both sound beautiful or both sound terrible. And the idea that like there is a speaker that sounds good with everything is just, it's malarkey. It is really, to take a Joe Biden term, it's malarkey.
IRs, that's a whole other rabbit hole, if people are watching this, they don't know this, they probably should, because this is my YouTube channel, but I make Helix patches. So but I don't make IRs myself, and so I get the lovely task of going through and demoing every IR I can possibly think of or know of to try and find a list to recommend to people, because it is so daunting as just an end user to try and go, okay, I got this patch, it's killer, or I made this patch, it's killer. What IR do I pair with it? There's so many out in the market today. And then, you have someone like Ownhammer, for example. They offer these bundles that have genuinely probably 20,000 impulse responses in a single pack. The one I recommend a lot for a lot of stuff is they call it like the debut bundle. They have a new like Revolution, I think they call it, pack, and it's got so many different cabs, so many different IRs, and it's unbelievable the amount of options and how it's, as we were saying before, this IR could sound great this day, this IR could sound terrible the very next day. There's so many variables to it. And then on top of that, something I'd love to talk about as well is the different sources you're using to listen to and how much that changes the tone too. Quick little aside. So I've got 2 pairs of headphones. I'm wearing these. I don't know if you can see them, but they're the Sennheiser HD 6XX from Massdrop. So they're like the 650, but the cheaper Massdrop versions. And then these are the DT 990s, which are fairly popular. This is they call it the premium version, I think. A little different. But I bought these 2 because I'm the kind of person that likes to figure it out for myself and see firsthand, versus just listening to random people on the internet. Because everyone's ears are different, especially for this kind of stuff. It's like all of our ears are different, and I'm not going to know unless I test it myself. I even have a pair of 770s up there actually as well. And I was shocked at the difference I heard from my 770s to the DT 990s. There was so much extra top end that wasn't there, that I had a similar experience as you did with the 65 Deluxe Reverb. You were saying when I pulled up some of my Helix patches with that, I went, holy cow, because it was one after another. I was switching. It was like changing a mic immediately, or a cab immediately, and I had that initial shock of, wow, this is so different. And obviously your ears set and like, oh, I actually really like the extra clarity and top end sizzle it has. So I really like what that brings. But it's, if somebody were to pull up a patch with that, listening with those headphones, and then another person pulls up the same patch with the 770s, it's going to be a different patch to those 2 people. Yeah. And then as somebody who creates tones for a living like you do, that's got to be such a difficult thing to be able to navigate, because beyond that, that's just one facet of it. You have guitar differences. My telly behind me, I guarantee sounds nothing like your white telly. Yeah. They're both white, but I bet they sound nothing alike.
No, there's every variable can be so important. The tellies are a good example. My telly even sounded so much, and it's great sounding telly. It's one of my favorites I've ever run into. It's probably one of the only guitars I ever ran into that was like, it was my first telly, and it just kind of cured my gas for almost all other tellies, which I just never got it right on a guitar first try like that. And I'm really not much of a telly guy, but that one just impressed me. But like the Suze had a broadcaster for a while, and those pickups were so thick and fat, and it sounded great. And those 2 guitars just sounded nothing like each other, And then you get into the more. Mine is a more 60s sound. It's a little brighter. It's a little more present. His was an like early 50s type tone. But man, no, what you're saying is true. It's so different. People ask me all the time, what's the best thing to listen to? There is no best thing to listen to. One of the things that I learned when I got to Nashville was I started talking to a lot of producers. And have you heard of NS7s, Yamaha NS7s? Yeah. They're famous because they're dogs. They're just, everyone knows that they're not great. And so when you go into a lot of studios here, you see them, and they're not even in production, I don't believe, anymore. But you see them in everyone's studio, and they're always along with other monitors. And what you don't realize unless you ask or you just know that nobody uses them is that they're always muted. And the reason they're always muted is that They're just there as a control to test. They mix on something else, and then they switch to the NS7s because the saying is, if it sounds good on NS7s, it'll sound good on anything. So literally, they just mix, then they go to the NS7s, and whatever the problem is, they make some little adjustments, then they go back, and they're like, that's fine, that's good. You know, like, it's funny that they do that because that was their solution. You know, get bad monitors. And like, you know, enjoy your good ones, mix your good ones, but then go to the bad ones and solve the problems because your user is going to be listening on not good quality stuff, which is a really interesting way to think about it. So what I try to do is, you know, my mantra has just been, I'm going to be consistent and I'm going to listen to people. And I know I have a reputation of putting out brighter profiles. Whereas like Michael Britt has a reputation, they call it the sort of his signature warm sound. Me and him have talked about that a lot. You know, we think it's really funny. It's down to everyone's ears, and it's down to just, you know, it's so challenging. It's so challenging. One person's like thick and grunty is another person's like too bright. And there's so many things. And you know where you see it a lot, man, is in-ear monitors. Man, I get so many people messaging me going like, my tones sound great at home, but when I go to church, they don't sound good anymore. I'm like, what are you using? And they're like, Shure 215s. And I'm like, I think we found the culprit. Okay, this is like, these are, you know, but you know what? I have a pair.
Yeah.
And I've used them before, and they're awful, but they work, you know? But, you know, which pro tip, by the way, I don't know what you're using. Do you have molds for your ears?
I for live use, I have A3s from 64 Audio.
So, So you know what I've been using is those, man, what's those ones? The AS80s, you know, the KS, KSI?
The Amazon special.
Dude, I'm telling you, man, those things are better than the Shure 500 series for sure. And those Shure 500s are like $400, you know?
Yeah.
Like I had a pair of that, and then I bought a cheap pair of these. And when I say cheap, I mean it's like $80. And they have different levels, and you can tell one's like more for bass, you know, and one's because they're tuned differently. But man, 5 in each ear, and I think it's $79. And the whole band, once I showed it to them, they started buying them, and we started swapping them around, like trying all the different ones. And dude, all the singers are on one pair now. We just told everyone, go buy them, and they're so cheap, nobody has a problem. But, dude, they're incredible. Even if you've got your 64s and you like them, get a backup pair of these. You know what I mean? Because it's just it's worth it.
Quick rant about in-ear monitors. They are
go.
the most difficult thing to buy in the world because you have no idea what it's going to sound like. And there's no way that a pair of in-ear monitors, I'm going to hear it the same way you do, even if it's the same one, because it's all the way inside your ear canal. It's going to be heard differently based off of your ear shape and all that different, you know, how big your ear canal, whatever, all that stuff. But they're so expensive, and yet it's something that you cannot demo. So you just have to take a leap of faith and go like, I kind of trust you, or I saw this on a forum once. So searching for in-ear monitors was like the most frustrating like purchase for me. Actually, my wife bought me them as I think it was a Christmas gift or something. But obviously, she asked me what I was wanting. But it was like I have no idea. I have no idea how my A3s compare to anything else. Right. I just know I love them. They sound. I actually hate them at home. I never use them anywhere but live. For whatever reason, I think they sound terrible plugged into the Helix. They sound terrible through the Kemper. I just do not like how they sound. But in a live environment, they're amazing.
So I think there can be an impedance issue, and I never really delved into it enough to figure it out. But what I've heard is that, a lot of people plug in, they say the Kemper headphone output sounds bad, and same thing with Helix with their in-ears. And it has something to do with the impedance of those units or something, that like it's not correct, or it'll I don't know what it is, but...
Yeah, I've heard that as well, and I could do another rant, but those 770s right there are the 16 ohm. They're rare, the 16 ohm. Normally they're like 32, 80, that kind of range. I think these are like 300 and the DT990s. Actually, I also got the lower 132s for that because everyone said that exact thing you're saying right now is the issue with the Helix was you needed 80 ohm or higher, I can't remember what the actual term is for it, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And so I actually went to a Guitar Center, brought my Helix with me, and said, I want to try all of the headphones. And so they got them all out, and I demoed each one, and those are my favorites. So I walked out with those. Yeah. And then I didn't even know they were 16 ohm until I went on the forums and I looked them up, and they're like, everyone's like, 16 ohm won't work with the Helix. It's, terrible. I'm like, they were by far my favorites out of all the ones I tested. Right. But so I think, maybe it's true, but from my personal experience, it's one of those things where.
What is good and what is bad is, it's in the ear of the beholder. Hendrix used a 50-foot cable because he liked the high-end roll-off. He's playing a Strat into, at one point it was a Plexi, but early on it was an amp called a Super Amplifier 100. It was like a JTM 45 with a 100-watt power section. They converted him. And he liked the high-end roll-off because he wanted the most gain possible, put everything at 10, but that meant you can't take the treble back or the presence back. And so his way of darkening it up was a 50-foot cable, which we would say, you can't do that. But he liked it. And, man, my whole, the spiel I give people is like, sound doesn't really exist anyway. You know what I mean? We know it's there. We can measure it, but it might as well just be made up. I mean, it's just like everything else. It's like you can't see it. You can measure it. It's these waves, and they're physical, and they're floating around out there. But the only way you pick them up, it doesn't. You can't do anything to it out here without machines. So what you end up doing is. Where is it? Where is it? The sound's in your head because the only way we're perceiving it is through these two microphones on this gimbal that sort of just float around in the world, and they're never in the same spot, so they're always picking up different stuff. And then it goes in, and then we've got this weird tissue thing with liquid in it that converts the sound into electric symbols, or, into electric pulses that go into our brain. And then our brain tells us that was bassy and low. No, that was high and sizzly. You know what I mean? But so, and we know from taste and stuff, some people like one food and some people like another. And that's just your brain telling you this is good or this is bad. It's probably the same sensation. It's just a feedback you get from this weird, limbic system that's just making it all up as you go along. So bright and chimey is just too bright to someone, but it's this way to another. And 16 ohm, you might like the way the high end is affected, and someone else is going to say everything's too dark now, or whatever, or who knows. Michael Britt and me always talk about speakers. He hates greenbacks. I love them. You know what I mean? He hates them. I'm like, what are you talking about? They're the best ever. It's But that's just how it is. It's all just people's perception.
Yeah, I think it's something that I'm sure is can be difficult for you having to deal with all of those different. I'm sure you get plenty of emails from people.
Oh. Dude, my inbox is like the Kemper help desk somehow. I get the most random questions, people asking me about units I've never had on the channel and FRFR units, and I'm like, I am not intimately familiar with all of these things. How could I answer this question? Or monitors, I get, hey, what's the 64 versus the UAs versus the, and I have no idea,
Well, people trust you. That's probably why.
I guess.
You've earned that trust, but for better or for worse.
You must get a lot. You get a lot of questions, I'd assume, about
all
sorts of things.
Yeah.
Headphones, gear.
It's not too bad. I definitely don't have nearly as much content or as big of a following as you, so I don't get as much. But I do get on occasion. I'm happy to help with people. But so for some things you run into people, it's just personal preference, or people are afraid to do any tweaks or adjustments. I'm sure you get that a lot. You're like, it's really bright. You're like, did you try turning down the definition control in the treble? Or
I always get questions like, is 65% mix too high? That's like, well, I don't know. Are chips too salty? I'm not sure. It's up to you. I don't know. Yeah. It's funny. There's the more like older guys I talk to, and the more like, especially the ones who have some level of fame or have some, they've done a lot of recording or whatever, they were just never afraid to try anything, and even still they do stuff that breaks the rules, because they came from a time where there was no internet message board to tell them they were doing it wrong.
Yeah.
So they were just figuring stuff out, and they're just working with whatever they had, So it's I always encourage people to just test stuff out, try it. You might love it, you might like it. There's a lot of funny things out there that I never really understand, like gain staging pedals is sort of like a modern thing that a lot of people do that I just never really could quite understand the approach to it, because it doesn't replicate, like, it kind of replicates how a tube amp works, I guess, in a way that you could cast gain stages, but you certainly don't have the controls of like turning a gain stage on or off, unless you're talking about like a really modern amp, like a Diesel or a Marshall might on another channel cascade, or something. But that's just usually not how they work. So I don't know. It's just always been a weird thing. Like, what's a good gain stage 1 pedal, 2? It's like, I don't know, man. We're just throwing stuff up at the wall. There's really no, maybe I like a little mid-range up front or maybe something else in the back, but it all seems almost nonsensical, to me. There's no, like there's rules, but there's really no rules.
Yeah.
There's no,
I think
no
the
system behind it.
The hard part, I'm actually going through this right now, is so I have been, I got the Helix about 3.5 years ago, and I literally bought it to flip it because somebody was selling it locally, or maybe on the forum or something, for really cheap. I think I got it for like $900 with the bag. And I was like, oh, sick, I'll get it and I'll flip it, because I was like, I'm not going modeling, that whole kind of thing. Yeah. I got it in. I'm like, oh, let me just check it out. And I pulled it out. I'm like, oh, wow, this actually sounds really good. And I started tweaking it. And then literally 2 weeks later, I sold all of my amps and my pedals. And then I was just all in on the Helix. And I was like that for a long time. So fast forward, 3.5 years later, the only pedal I've ever purchased in that time was this, because the opportunity arose.
Yeah.
Green. I'm not sure if you noticed that, but
wait, is that a King of Tone?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, but it's green? Oh, I see now. Yeah, now I see. Yeah. Oh, wow. I didn't even know they were making green.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if they still are, or if it was like it was just an option when I went to get it, but
wow.
So I've had that sitting around, and there's a couple reasons why I got it. Partly because you can't see right now, but I've got a couple Victory tube amps over here that I was experimenting with to run, and live I couldn't get them loud enough to get them where I wanted, so I was using the King of Tone as kind of to get them crunching a little bit. But anyways, all that aside, I've had this bug all of a sudden to start looking into building a pedal board. It's been 3 years. I know literally nothing about the current pedal market. I was pretty fresh into the market before I got the Helix and sold everything. I was just learning in the process then. I don't have a ton of experience with a lot of stuff, but the hard part is that there's no places anymore where I can go and try out the things. And so everyone is so reliant on some random person who could have terrible ears on a forum saying, this is the best overdrive I've ever played. This is, infinitely better than this. And so people, I totally understand why people ask me those questions, because I'm the person asking those questions now, because I have no idea. I've never compared, this to that, and there's no place around me that sells them. I mean, like most places, the Guitar Center I have close to me is like 35 minutes away, and it's trash. So there's who knows if they'll even be around, in the next year with everything else going on. So I totally understand that, but that's actually kind of been the catalyst for a lot of the videos I've been doing for my YouTube channel, whether it's the ABR comparison for the Les Paul here. Yeah. I did that because everyone says the Faber's the best, the Callahan's the best, the Tone Pros is the best, the stock is the best. And I'm like, but nobody has anything to support it. Nobody does anything. And if they do, it's usually a pretty terrible comparison with 5 minutes between not playing the same thing, which goes back to our earlier point about, if you give a gap, you're going to forget what you heard and you're not going to be able to accurately hear. So I did that. And I recently did a PAF pickup comparison in the Les Paul too. Same reason.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
I've never change the pickups in any of my guitars because they're all great guitars, and I wouldn't have owned them if they weren't great sounding guitars in the first place. But I was curious, and so I did that swap. And again, most pickup swaps, everything you hear, it's hilarious to me, is shot with an iPhone with an amp in the room. You're like, well, I have no idea what this actually sounds like. It's very frustrating to me. And actually, one of the things I love about having the Kemper is because it makes it so easy for me to pull up. I mean, in that video, I used probably 6 different ToneJunkie profiles in that, ranging from the 54 Super to the I can't remember, the Matchless Independence, which is just one of the best sounding amps I've ever heard. Profiles, I should say.
Thank you.
So I did a bunch of different stuff with that, and so it's really amazing because I'm able to keep everything exactly the same. I mean, this, a tube amp, one day it sounds this way, the next day it could sound different. It happens. The caps, drift and all that kind of stuff, and it's just, who knows what's going on with the tubes and all of that. So it's really helpful for that because you can keep it super consistent and almost clinic. Obviously, there's so many variables that I can't control, and whatever, people will get mad at me for that. But I don't even remember where I was going with that.
No, it's people haven't had the opportunity to try, everything, and they. The internet is a weird place. It's a lot of the confirmation bias. I bought something, therefore I have to say it's the best. And you were mentioning building a pedal board, and I also have been wanting to build a pedal board, and every time I try to go through with it, I just don't quite get there. For no other reason than I wanted to put an HX Stomp and the Iridium together, and because I've been using some effects on the HX Stomp, and I wanted to put them together with my Cali 76 and the King of Tone or something, and but I don't know. I just keep going back to the Kemper. It's so at home for me that I'll never bring the board out. I just bring my stage everywhere, and I don't know. And pedals are so cool though. I got a bunch sitting down here that I use for profiling and stuff sometimes, and sometimes I do miss it. But I think one of the things that has turned me off lately to pedals is just the insane hype train around certain items that have come out. And look, I get, people, if they're familiar with ToneJunkie, are going to be like, what is this guy talking about? He's like the hypiest person ever, right? Like, okay, but there's just some pedals out there that, it's like a ton of hype. People buy them, and then you never hear about them again. And I'm not going to mention any names. There's a particular manufacturer that seems to just really be able to hype every release, and then I just don't hear I just don't hear people talk about them much after a certain amount of time, and I
bet I know exactly who you're talking about.
I don't even necessarily think they're bad pedals. I have a couple of them. I have 1 or 2 of them, and it's just that, and it's not even their fault. It's not even the company doing anything. It's just this crazy thing. Like every pedal is like the King of Tone killer, which is like, at this point, it's like the King of Tone is Michael Jordan. And you just compare everyone's stats. Like, is LeBron better yet? Like, no, I don't know. Compare his stats, and so it's kind of a weird thing. You want to know the worst pedal that I ever got that I just could never wrap my head around? What? And these guys make other really great pedals, and if they didn't, I wouldn't beat up on them. But the Chase Bliss Brothers, to me, is a pedal that I just could never figure out. What is anyone? A ton of hype, and I don't get it. I never could figure out, like, what did this thing do really great? The King of Tone, it sounds great, and it just is like mid-forward, and I personally really like the distortion mode, the hard clipping mode in it. I like the overdrive too. On the red side. Yeah, that's how I do my, and I like the overdrive also, but I just think that heavier tone is so great, and I actually every week play a profile of that pedal on the hard clipping side through an AC30, and that's like one of my main tones. It's not super gained up, but I just dig the sound of that thing.
Yeah. Do you think, just anecdotally, I feel like so much of that hype tends to stem from the P and dub crowd.
Oh, it's all them. Yeah. It's
I
all
feel like
them.
I mean, obviously there's a lot going on the gear page outside of that. That kind of is a train that, builds up a lot of hype in that way as well. But just anecdotally, and this is obviously, I'm somebody that has not been in the pedal market for 3 years. You get the King of Tone because you have the opportunity to get the King of Tone. As you said,
Right.
it's supposedly that good, which I think it is. I think it's an amazing pedal. I actually did a full video comparing it to the Helix, actually, which was just a beast to shoot. But and I think it showed that the King of Tone is really a fantastic pedal. Also showed that the Helix isn't far off. In a lot of cases, it's pretty close, but that's a whole other thing. But I think just as I'm cruising Facebook for groups or forums and stuff, you see this brand new overdrive that comes out and it's the end of the world. This is the best thing that's ever happened. It's going to it's going to change the game forever. You see it for literally a month, and then after that it's gone, and you see them for sale for the next, year. And it's so interesting to me because it's so consistent. It happens every time. It's like it's Groundhog Day, just over and over.
Yeah. 100%. This is the most controversial thing I'll say today. I really like Joey Landreth. I met Joey Landreth, super nice guy. But if I see a demo and someone's playing a slide, that tells me nothing about how it will sound for my Sunday morning, Hillsong intro. It's just not the same thing, right? So that could be a really great, but I think, man, there's always, people have always wanted to play the gear of Stevie Ray Vaughan. They've always wanted to play the gear of Hendrix and stuff and try to get that tone. And, who was using that tone? Like Eric Johnson was trying to get Hendrix's tone. And he would do these Hendrix performances where he dressed like Hendrix and everything. Stevie Ray Vaughan was covering Hendrix songs and re-recording them. Most of the fans, though, are just playing in like blues bar band kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And it's no different today with the P-dub crowd, We're all covering, for lack of a better term, these different songs. And, some people just want to nail the tone exactly,
Let's talk about this.
Yeah, let's talk
about it. Let's talk about praise and worship. So
go ahead.
P&W, for those that don't know, that stands for praise and worship. It just kind of generally describes people playing at church. Usually it's associated with more modern contemporary churches playing stuff like you mentioned. Hillsong is one very famous facet of praise and worship. So we both play fairly regularly at church. I believe you do, right?
Yeah, all the time.
Yeah, so and I've done that for most of my life as well. There's so much that goes with the phrase P&W, and we can get into it because there is so much. I kind of tend to completely reject being called a praise and worship guitarist because it's like it does pigeonhole you into such a small little corner, and there's so much negative connotation that goes with it, which I think a lot of it is deserved, and we can talk about that. Some of it is not. But let's talk about just kind of, well, first and foremost, how would you describe the differences playing at church versus out at a more traditional bar gig or something?
You mean in terms of tone or just the other stuff?
Besides getting beers, poured on your gear.
Look, man, church is for those people who, I know there's a lot of guys who just start playing in church and do that. The first places I ever really played in front of people were at church, and then I did some other stuff. And my perception was I started playing at church and I thought, well, it's really cooler if you play somewhere else. And then I joined like a pub and club band, and we started playing out, and we did mostly original stuff. We did a little record, and then I did some cover stuff with some guys, kind of a fun cover band thing. But anyway, what you quickly realize is, oh my gosh, church is the best gig in the world because you have a captive audience who wants to hear the music.
Right.
When you play in clubs, no matter what, people are talking over you. When the song ends, the roar of the talking comes back, and you realize, oh, it's been there the whole time.
Yeah.
And then just the level of technology is the fact that you get your own monitor mixes and stuff. I've played festivals that don't have as much attention to monitor mixes as your average Sunday morning, church. And I mean like big festivals, like with big, like, I don't know, whatever band you want to say is going to be up, like, Tomlin's coming up next, like, so, the challenge, I think church is an incredible gig, you know what I mean? But in terms of tone and stuff, what I have found is that working guitar players tend to understand, like if you play live and you play for a living, working guitar players tend to be a lot more simple with their approach. They have a real get it done attitude because they have a deliverable that has to get out there. And then, you've got, your typical praise and worship guy who's got a pedal board larger than, his guitar amp. And, he's going to play 3 songs and he needs 15 pedals to do it. It's a lot of attention to detail. I think there's it's a lot of attention to detail. That's how I'll put it. It's like I think because it's like a feature, it's like a effects rich sound that everyone goes for. The idea is that you need a ton of pedals and stuff. I think the sounds are in general a little more simplistic than that, and a lot of people go into a very complex way of getting them. But it's really just a lot of verb, a good amount of delay, a couple subdivisions, some light drive with a telly or other bright guitar, and you're there. That's about it. I mean,
Yeah.
That's
Yeah. I think there's a few things. There's a few things to that. I think, like I was saying before, there's a stigma to the praise and worship guitarist, and you just kind of said it, not only alluded to it, but it's the trope of he's, the praise and worship guitarist has very little skill. He has, a massive rig that's, way too much for his skill level. He has tone that's completely affected. You can't actually hear what he's playing. And then, of course, he's so low in the mix that you don't hear any of it anyways. Right. And so it's, and I think, obviously, a lot of that holds true for sure. Do you think the praise and worship guitarist is justly criticized? So you're kind of saying yes. Do you think, from my perspective, I totally run into those people. I mean, oh my goodness, you go to Gear Talk Praise and Worship, the Facebook group.
Yeah, of course.
It's like, if you want to see the most extreme, it's that place is rough. I can't spend much time there. It's I
think. No, I mean, look, there's a lot of people. Look, there's a lot of good players that play on Sunday mornings, And look, and I learned that when I moved to Nashville. I was a little worried when I got out here that was I going to be able to cut it, when I moved out here. And I quickly just realized that a lot of these guys who are on the road aren't that dependable for Sunday morning gigs anyway, because they go away for so long. So they need people, the churches always need people. And maybe they got a couple other guys, but a lot of the times you're playing with people who make their living. I mean, I've played with some of the best musicians I've ever encountered, and they're guys who make their living in the music business: bass players, drummers, guitar players, all sorts of people, and they're just fine helping out every now and then, And so is it? That is the stigma, and I think there is a lot of that. And you see a lot of people say stuff like, "Does this pedal P-dub?" Does it do P-dub? As though we have tones that are so inventive that they've never been done before, but they have been done before. But I also disagree with the assumption that we all we're doing is rehashing the Edge's tone. And I don't say this to mock P-dub people. I think that's disrespectful to the Edge. You know what I mean? Most people don't get as rockin' as him. And I don't know. Me personally, man, I mean, I've put a couple videos out, but I tend to play with more gain. I tend to do a lot more unison bends and a lot more stuff. I always played in I'm a big Foo Fighters fan. I'm of course I love the bluesy rock style, but I also like mid range and gain and stuff. And I also I like to take the James Duke approach, which is just turn the reverb off. You know what I mean? No one hears it anyway. But he uses a lot of delay, and he uses it in a way that sort of takes the place. These dark repeats that go over each other and stuff. You get what you deserve. We whatever criticism there is, we brought it upon ourselves. So I don't know.
Yeah.
But
I
listen,
think,
how good is David Hislop in his ability to craft
he's an amazing
a
player.
really great part and play the sideman role? And I think what a lot of people don't. I had lunch one time with the guys from J Rocket and Sean Tubbs, and Sean Tubbs is an incredible guitar player. And the joke is, I don't even know if it's a joke. I don't really quite understand all the things behind it, but people often ask him, "What's it like being the best guitar player in Nashville?" Right? And sometimes people say that to each other like as kind of a joke, and then they say, "I don't know, ask so and so." Right? And you could say there's a couple guys you say it about. I don't know, ask Tom Bukovac. I don't know, ask somebody else. But one of the guys at the table, it wasn't Sean, it was somebody else, said, "I don't get how you could play that music and like ever hope to be a great guitar player. Like if you like, how could you ever be like Hendrix or something?" And it was a real like okay boomer moment. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was a guy who idolizes Hendrix and Page and stuff, and I love that stuff too. But it's like, what are you talking about? You're just idolizing another person, right? The role of the P-dub guitar player, I think, in most ways is really just the sideman role. And the Edge made that the most famous, right? He musically created a sound that really shaped the sound of that band in a way that I don't know. Did he do it more than Brian May? Maybe, maybe not. But he did it in such a way that it became what he was doing was so noticeable, and it didn't sound like their contemporaries. It was a unique thing, and those guys were doing some incredible stuff. I mean, he would turn his deluxe memory men. He had so many deluxe memory men because they need to be calibrated. They're supposed to be 550 milliseconds at their max setting, but they never are. So
Right.
the reason he starts some of those songs is because they've got to be in time with him. It's at max setting. That's his dotted eighth. That's now the tempo of the song. And when a unit goes down, they got to get another unit that's about 496. I think in one of those rig rundown videos, his tech says that they always try to get him to 496 or something, 496 milliseconds, which I don't know what that puts the BPM at if it's a dotted eighth, but that's really an inventive way to go about like creating a sound and being so reliant on that. Are we as reliant on that today? I don't know. On the one hand, Nigel Hedroff has produced some of the most incredible, like great vocal parts or great, melody parts. But has the sound evolved tremendously since early Hillsong? I'm not sure it has. I'm not sure it needs to. I think the evolution has come more from, Bethel has had a sound, and you hear other people coming in. Vibrato certainly made its way in at one point. I don't know. I predict. I don't know. I predict the rotary speaker is the next big thing. How much bigger can our pedal boards get? We need to start bringing in enormous cabs, like Leslie cabs, I think.
Bringing Leslie.
Yeah, but man, I just think the music's good. I think people who criticize the music are dumb. Like that's maybe that's the harshest thing I'll say. I think they're dumb. I think if you openly come out and say like, I wish we had music that was like more interesting musically, then I would just say, then you're not looking. There's a ton of artists that are unique. There's a ton of artists that are writing really interesting music. Like, I don't know, if you're looking for more reformed music, like with really rich theology, there's a guy named Matt Papa who's writing songs which are sung in churches all around the country, and I bet the people singing them think it's 100 years old, or they think it's something like that. And then you have Young and Free coming out with the most like poppy, catchy stuff. Audrey Assad and Matt Maher are probably making some really interesting music in terms of just like they're literally singing creeds at times, in terms of musically interesting, it's like, yeah, we've had like Dustin Krensu did his thing. King's Kaleidoscope has been out here, like almost bringing a more progressive element and definitely unique instrumentation. And shut up and start a band. You know what I mean? I mean, just nothing's stopping you. The distribution's democratized. Go write an amazing song.
Yeah.
I don't know. Right? I mean,
no, yeah, totally.
yeah.
I think it's always funny. Usually the people that are really going down on praise and worship players are usually the guys who have like 2 blues licks that they just like, that's all they play. That's their repertoire. Yeah. But on the flip side of that, I mean, there's a lot of praise and worship players who know these 3 triads that are literally the base of pretty much every riff written in P&W's kind of music. And it's all good. It's all fine. I think praise and worship, I've got a lot of different feelings about praise and worship. I think as a musician, I should clarify. I think on one hand, a lot of churches, I don't know if you've experienced this, but a lot of churches really prioritize, as you kind of said in the beginning of this, be exactly like the record. I want you to do the part note for note and sound as close as you can to the record. We're not going to accept any of your own individual creativity, your own voice. There's a ton of pressure for you to just basically be an overdub of that person.
Yeah. And
I think that creates a really, it can create, I don't want to speak in too many generalities here, but I think it can create a really just negative culture. And also it just really inhibits your growth as a musician because,
totally.
I'm going back and forth with this because a lot of people, they learn by learning covers of songs, right? So if like, I want to stretch myself, I want to learn something new, I'm going to pull up a classic, Billy Gibbons song or something and learn some of these riffs he does. But I'm choosing a song that's a challenge to me, right? And I'm choosing a song that's got parts that I can grow into and learn more of, I can get an insight on what he's thinking by learning the solo he does or something. And I feel like when you're first starting out, that's a good thing with praise and worship because you do learn a lot of really good foundational things like triads and basic melodies, following the vocals, all those sort of things. But then once you get to a certain level, let's say intermediate guitar player, you hit a wall and a lot of places don't let you go across that wall. And then you kind of start losing your own identity. And then you just become, a mini David Hislop or, whoever else you want to say. And then and then that's where you kind of getting into the people where they're kind of stagnant as players because that's just the environment they're in. And that's the only opportunity for them to play, right? They're not going out and playing gigs at festivals or whatever. They're playing Sunday morning, Saturday night for their church. So that's their only experience. So there's nowhere for them to go. They can put all this work into getting to be a better player, but they can't use that for anything. And so I think a lot of what happens is then they shift to gear. It's like, there's nowhere really for me to go with my skill level of like learning parts, whatever. It's like, I'm kind of already there. I want to get the next greatest sound that's going to be exactly what he played. I want to get his exact pedal. I want to buy his Big Sky presets, that sort of thing. Yeah. And I think that's where it kind of leads into that cliche, which absolutely is there's obviously truth behind it because that's usually what happens with those sort of things. There's a lot of people like that. And I think also, not to totally defend those people, but I think what people don't realize from the outside is these players, these people that you see with these boards that are associated with that, they have day jobs. They have, good paying jobs. I'm saying generalities here, not everyone, but a lot of the time they have a good paying job and being a musician is their side thing. It's a hobby to them. And so, as a musician, a real musician, like I don't consider myself a musician. I don't consider myself a musician for a couple reasons, but one of the reasons is that I've never had to rely on music or my guitar playing as any form of income. Like that's never been something that I've relied on. It's always been something I did on the side. And so, typically a real musician, unless you're playing giant stadiums or something, you're going to have a more meager setup. You're going to have to get really good at getting the most out of the gear you have.
Right.
Whereas you have people who are playing worship, and a lot of times they're people who have a good, solid 9 to 5 day job. They live in have a comfortable living, and they have this side money that they can put towards stuff. And instead of a car, instead of, adding an intake and exhaust or whatever to their car, they're buying the Strifecta or, something like that. And
Totally.
And then you have that, and those are kind of the people that I get the brunt of it. And I've certainly experienced that from people. Just anecdotally from me is I've got a lot of very nice guitars. I didn't get them all at once, whatever.
Yeah.
But I have a 9 to 5 job. I have a great job, and I don't, I've had the same first vehicle I ever owned when I got, when I was 16. I don't have any other car. It's been paid off 6 years ago, whatever. So I put my money into my guitars because it's what I enjoy. And I can afford to do that because I'm not relying on gigs, to be able to pay for it. So generally, I'm not into defending that stereotype. But just as a little aside to people that maybe are watching this that aren't in that world, that's a lot of it as well, I think.
Yeah, when I was young, I remember going to this. If there's any like people from the Bay Area watching, there's an old music store called Gelb Music in Redwood City, California. That shop has been there like forever, probably since the early '50s, and I think it got bought out now. But anyway, I went in there, and they were the first shop that I ever saw like Sir guitars in, or they had Tom Anderson's, not even Sir yet. They had Tom Anderson's, and they had a bunch of Fender stuff, and they had amps I'd never heard of. They were carrying some boutique lines, and full tone pedals they had in there at the time when that was like one of the only boutique brands you could find. Them, and who was the other one? Frantone. Remember Frantone? They made Fuzz It. Dude, This is like Harmony Central days, like early, like Gear Page was small, anyway. But basically, they had a lot of really nice stuff. I'd go in there, and I remember looking at all the Les Pauls, and I said, man, who buys these? And the guy said to me, lawyers. And I said, really? And he said, yeah, lawyers. They wanted to be rock stars, and now they're lawyers. So they can buy $6,000 Jimmy Page signature Les Pauls. Those guys, the blues lawyer is 55 plus. And our generation's version of the blues lawyer is the Sunday morning insurance salesman, investment advisor who's 30 years old. He's young in his career. He's making good money. And he's got the Strifecta and a Veritas and whatever, you know what I mean, a Jackson amp. And all those are great pieces of gear. My only point is that's who it is now. It's that someone with a nice 9 to 5, and they're not weekend warriors anymore in blues bands, in cover bands. Their gig is Sunday morning, And if you look at the landscape of America, at least this is how it is in California probably. Most of it, certainly in Northern California where I'm from. I imagine you guys still have, in the San Diego area where you are, you probably still have some live music venues kicking around. But you probably, not anymore, right? But it now, I mean, we're in a situation where there's more live music on Sunday mornings than Friday nights.
Oh, wait, I would say way more.
Yeah. So,
I mean, yeah.
So players go where there's a place to play. So this is where the guitar is thriving. If those articles were true, the electric guitar is dying. It's certainly not dying in the Sunday morning world. It's never been bigger. And look, we were talking about those guys. I get it when someone's like, I just want to play this exactly. There's places who are trying to, maybe their music isn't that great, and they're all about challenging their people to just be excellent and be better. And the first place I ever played was kind of like that. And at some point, you, as a team, you shouldn't have to. You don't need to really direct people. You know what I mean? The culture out here where I am now in Nashville, man, if a pastor had an opinion about the worship music, it would be very strange, because he's probably talking to a bunch of people who make their living or have made their living at least at some point in their life
Right.
from music, you know? And like, I'll
Right.
just tell you on my worship team, which is not like a big church, probably like a church of like 400 people out here just in the suburbs where I live. Of the other guitar players, you know, one just, you know, had been with Brooks and Dunn for years. He's been in stadiums forever, doing the stuff. Another one's a professional producer who just plays guitar for us. Another guy's like a dude trying to do it, and then the other one's me. You know, it's like the four of us, right? And then the drummers, same thing. Half of them, you know, they leave for a while. Bass players, you know, it's like a guy with a 9 to 5, but he's a monster. You know, keyboard players, dudes like, I mean, we got two guys. One's a producer, one's like a killer gospel guy. You know what I mean? So there's different cultures, different places. What I find interesting is I can't imagine how anybody could tell someone you need to play what's on the record right now. And if they only have one guitar player, how are you supposed to achieve that? So I go in, and my style is I just always tell the drummer, because we always run tracks. We always run a click track. We always have tracks. And I always tell them, take out every guitar. And they go, every guitar? And I go, yeah. They go, there's 4 tracks of guitars. I go, exactly. Take out every single guitar. Because I've already thought of what I need to pull in and what I need to play. And to me, that's part of the fun. We're now playing live, and live is its own thing. We're not reproducing the record. I mean, this is how I look at it. We're covering this song, we're doing this song, but we want to do this song in this room, in this setting with these people. So my guitar tone's going to be a little bit different. If I'm playing with the gospel guy, he's on the keys, and guess what? He is going to lean more on the piano sounds and more on doubling melodies and stuff, less on the spacey, ethereal stuff, less on the ambient stuff. So that affects how I'm going to play, you know, and that affects when I double him. If I'm going to double him on a melody, if I'm going to be more ambient or less ambient, or if I'm going to take the role of almost like a pad underneath a part he's playing, or what I'm going to do. But if I play with the other dude, he's not on the piano at all. He's all on the pads. He's doing all this stuff. Now I'm free to be less ambient. If there's you know, 2 acoustic guitar players, I think it changes things. If there's a cello, sometimes we got you know, the cello shows up, and I'm like, what are you doing? You know, I got to figure out now what I'm going to do here. And that's part of the musicianship aspect of it. So I get that thing, like reproduce what's there, be excellent. Man, I get that. But at some point, you know, we're musicians trying to play this music with this arrangement, and we don't have room for 7 overdubbed parts, you know, which is in the music today. That's just in the music.
Yeah.
So, you know.
Yeah, so I moved to where I'm at now maybe a year and a half ago. Mm-hmm. Before that, I didn't move that far, but I was maybe an hour away from where I'm at now. And so we obviously went to a different church then, and the church there was a lot more in the play the parts, like the parts. You know, they did, depending on your skill level, they gave you a longer leash. Mm-hmm. You know, so it's like, okay, he can play, so he can like do a little bit different. But generally the expectation, and again, it was with tracks and all that kind of stuff. So you kind of fit within the mold of it. And then I moved down here, and I'm by the beach. And so the whole attitude is very different here. It's completely different. And then I ended up going to a church, so long story short, before I moved with my wife, we went church shopping, for lack of a better word. We went to a bunch of churches to try and find one that kind of we agreed with their theology and all that kind of stuff. And so we ended up finding a church, and then started going. Awesome. And lo and behold, the pastor is the dad of John Foreman and Tim Foreman of Switchfoot. Yeah. So he would be a pastor that could say something about music. And sure. But so I went there, and that church has an insane number of musicians that are all professionals, that have all done it, you know, that have all done recordings. A lot of them have actually, 3 of them I know have moved to Nashville. Mm-hmm. A lot of them came from Nashville and moved over here. It was a whole different world. And it went from getting the songs 2 weeks in advance, having the planning center with the song adjusted in the key so you can practice with it exactly, to, okay, we're going to do this song, and we might go and do this song. We're probably going to do this song. And then, the morning of, you figure it out. And then the closing song, who knows, we'll figure it out right before we go out, kind of thing.
Yeah.
It was a whole totally different environment. And then it was nobody played the same parts. Nobody played the exact parts. And so for me, it was like a culture shock, because I was so used to spending all this time learning these parts, and it was immediately apparent to me how much that had brought down my skill level, because my ability to improv had kind of, it's a muscle. You have to work it out. Absolutely. And it hadn't been worked in so long. And so it was really fascinating to me. And then we would do, we had at my church, there's a Sunday night service. It's a big church. Mm-hmm. And the Sunday night service has an extended worship at the end of it. And they add 5 or 6 songs. And those songs aren't chosen until right before you go up, basically, maybe an hour before. And then it just kind of goes with the moment, and who knows where it's going to go. Yeah. And it was so frustrating to me in the beginning, but it's incredible how much I've learned from it, how far I've come because of that. And I really have been able to kind of build my own voice and see what kind of player I am, and to kind of, what's my tone? Mm-hmm. What's my kind of parts I like to go for? Yeah. So it's been really interesting to me. And I see the people that are locked into that, like, play the parts 1-to-1, just like the record. And I'm like, I was there, and I totally see that in the long run, there's so much not negativity, but it just doesn't. We don't have to get into too much of this, but we've all been given. We have these God-given skills, right? So we've been given these talents, these abilities, and we're using them to praise God at church. And so, do you think that He wants you to, give 10% of your ability? Do you think He wants you to give all? He gave you the ability to be a creative person, and you have your own voice. So, but obviously there's nuance to it. You don't want somebody who's just going to be shredding,
right.
Arpeggios left and right. That doesn't fit it. But, I think we all know what I'm talking about.
You got to respect the music, respect the song.
Right. Yeah. So from my perspective, I see a lot of that, and I just go, man, I'm so glad I'm not in that anymore, because I feel like I've grown so far. Like, I play right now, there's a couple different teams, and I've been with the quote unquote gospel team for the past, few months. And oh my goodness, it's a whole different world. Yeah. It's unbelievable. All the different chord changes, the chromaticism. It's like, you're always on your toes. And it's been so great for me to be able to learn that. It's a completely different facet of, they probably would never consider it praise and worship, but right. I mean, kind of is, but, but yeah, I think
I had exactly the same experience when I moved here, and I was around a bunch of songwriters, and we were doing sometimes it was songs that I had heard of, and sometimes it was like there was a song they wrote that week, and they would just show up and they'd call out the changes. They'd just call out the numbers, and then boom, it's time to play. What I ended up loving from that was that I ended up realizing when I first got there, they did a record real fast. And then I kind of got on the team, and then a couple of the guys dropped off. One of the guys went to keyboard. One of the guys got busy, and then I ended up as me and this other dude as like the main guitar players. And I was a little more experienced than him. And what I realized that meant was every new song was an opportunity to write the parts, as we did it live. And then when it came time to do the record, we had a bunch of parts, and it was, you could write other stuff now that you're hearing it in a different context, but. It was an incredible education, in just being able to play songs you don't know and that you never heard before you played it. But it makes you grow. I mean, the first week they were calling out numbers, and I knew how the numbers worked, but I didn't use them. So they would just. Then I had to go home, do my homework, brush up, and be able for them to just call out a key, call out some numbers, and just follow them, and what was really intimidating was when I got there, they would have done a demo sometimes, and they'd pass the phone around, and the bass player would just listen, and then he'd put it down and play the song, right? And then I just learned, well, they're not actually listening for tonality, they're just listening for the changes. Like, once they hear the song, they're just listening to what it is, and you can hear a fifth and a fourth and that's probably all it is. There's a sixth, and then you're
Yeah.
lucky if a third or a second comes up. That's a, you know what I mean? Yeah. So,
Yeah.
it's
So
an
a
education.
couple, for sure. Yeah. It's I've never learned more just being put in the moment, going, okay, I feel like we're gonna go and do this song. Never heard the song in my life.
Mm-hmm.
I just got to come up with stuff, but it's great. Let's do a couple of quick hitting because I was we waxed on a little bit there. Let's do a couple
that's
quick
right.
hitting questions for praise and worship real quick.
You can cut this down to whatever you think it's gonna, be.
But what I might end up doing is I might end up splitting it into parts. I'm not sure yet, but
Sure.
So music stands on stage, yes or no?
No stands on stage, but I like music on stage. So get an iPad or just write your numbers out. I do this sometimes for songs that are I can't always remember. I try to just memorize all songs, but I'm always the guy who has 2 or 3 sheets of paper in front of my board, just on the ground, just for reference in case I forget.
Yeah, I do a similar thing. So you already said that you would not. I'm just going through a couple things I wanted to ask you.
I'm okay with it. I'm okay with it, but I just think put it on the ground. It looks you could stare at your shoes and look cool. You know what I mean? You don't need to we don't need a stand.
Yeah, definitely. I think we covered most of that stuff for praise and worship. So I have a bunch of other topics. Obviously, this has gone on pretty long.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how much time you have.
I should get to editing in, I don't know, maybe 20 or 30 minutes.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
So let's talk about. Would you rather talk about amps or guitars?
Man, whatever. Why don't you tell us which is better, Helix or Kemper?
Oh yeah, there's a conversation. I was thinking about this the other day because typically when I'm building a new preset pack for the Helix, are you there?
Tanner, are you there?
Hey.
Typically, and then you just stopped. So I didn't hear it.
Okay, so what I was saying is that typically when I'm building a new preset pack for the Helix, I use the Helix exclusively. And I went probably 3 months without turning on the Kempers and just used the Helix. And I got some killer tones in it. Can't remember what I was working on. I was working on the Starlight, Bethel-esque, and then Plexi as well. I updated that. And I was loving the tones. I mean, the fact that you can get the 2 amps in stereo within the Helix itself is it's a different thing. It's a different animal to one Kemper by itself. Obviously, I have 2 here, but just comparing one Kemper to the Helix, that has a totally different tonality. So I think if your sound is two amps blended, 2 different amps, then I feel like the Helix, unless you can afford 2 Kempers and can handle, so they're a lot more bulky and all that other stuff. The Helix is an awesome piece of gear for that. It sounds really good.
Yeah.
When it comes to just amp versus amp, the best tones I've ever had on the Kemper are by far and away better than the best tones I've ever had on the Helix.
Yeah.
Now, there is a medium where they're pretty similar a lot of the times. And not similar in the way they sound, but the quality. They have different tonalities to them. The Kemper has this mid-range thing that exists in all of the profiles, in my opinion. There's something I hear that, I've tried doing blind tests with my own self, just kind of recording stuff. And there's always something with the Kemper that I'm able to notice. And actually, when I started using the Kemper at church, the sound guy told me it sounds like the track, the soloed out guitar track from the song was pumped through the front of house, but he phrased it as a negative. He didn't phrase it like it's an amazing tone, and it was an amazing tone. He agreed and thought it was an amazing tone. He thought it was too perfect. It didn't have some edge to it that, and this is his words, that came from the tube amp or even the Helix, because the Helix has a more gritty sound to it in the gain, I think, a lot of the times. Yeah. The Kemper is very polished sounding. It sounds like the perfect master guitar track. That's the way I interpret it a lot of the times. Obviously, there's tricks and stuff you can do. I'm the kind of person who takes the internal compressor, turns it off. I don't use any compressor on the Kemper. But just overall, and the Kemper feels amazing to play. It's so chewy feeling. You can really feel it get back to you. The Helix is a lot stiffer. the low end definition on the Kemper is way better. It's got much deeper lows, but there's also a lot of definition to it, whereas the Helix tends to flub out on the low end. I think the low end is probably where I struggle the most with the Helix. Then the top end as well. The Helix has kind of a more brittle top end in general. In my opinion. But so for just pure amp tones, I think the Kemper is awesome. And the fact that you can play, I mean, you've profiled 100 to 120 amps, whatever it's been. The Helix has maybe 30 amp models in it. And then you have to go through, we don't have time for this, but go into the whole thing of stock cabs and IRs and all of that. There's so much more to it. Whereas the Kemper, I don't use IRs in the Kemper. I refuse to, because I want it to be this is the amp that was captured. This is the speaker. I want to play that amp. I'm just not able to. So this is the next best thing for me. Whereas the Helix, you go into the rabbit hole of all the different EQ stuff and all the different tips and tricks you can, I've talked about on various videos. But in general, I think the Helix, if you need to do 2 amps in stereo, the Helix is hard to beat versus one Kemper. If you need to do lots of effects, flexibility, the Helix is way more flexible.
You get way more. That Air Apparent is really good too. Since that's come out, I don't think I've used another overdrive in the Helix.
The Klon is great too. I love the Klon in it.
Yeah. But
So I think the Kemper to me is very bizarre. It's like this. You try a new profile pack that you put out, like the 5E4 Super. And it's like, this is the most amazing piece of technology ever. It's like cutting edge. I cannot believe how good this sounds. It sounds, that one does have a lot of rawness to it, which I like. That's a little different than some of the other profiles I've tried. And, but then at the same time, I tried to delete all the profiles on one of my Kempers to start fresh.
Yeah.
It wouldn't do it. The Kemper froze every single time trying to delete profiles. I had to do like 70 at a time, and it took probably an hour to get through all of the profiles. It's like this piece of technology that's like so cutting edge sounding. It sounds amazing, and yet the files are like 15 kilobytes a piece, and it can't delete them.
So I actually think, this is just a pro tip, it probably looked like it crashed, but was just still working.
Well, it has a little progress bar, and I let it sit for like 30 minutes, and it never
just
changed.
Stayed there. So the thing, I know I've seen a lot of weird stuff. When I've deleted a lot, it'll tell me deleting like negative 47 rigs of 2 rigs.
Yeah.
I'm like, wait, what does this mean? Anyway, Christoph one time told me, he's like, just ignore it, just do it. Or the other thing is, I told him one time, I said, hey, sometimes when it freezes and I put it in the off position, like if it freezes and I turn it off, it doesn't do anything. It stays on. And he told me, just wait it out. And he's right. If you just wait it out, what's happening is the screen is not responding to you anymore. It's the screen that isn't responding. It's still apparently trying to do whatever. I know it's a unit designed by engineers for sure. The UI could really use some help. But I think there's going to be another. I think the next Kemper will end up having same profile tech, but some different options.
So let's say this new product. Well, if you're a Christoph Kemper, what would it be?
The next product?
Yeah.
Would be
Kemper
an HX Stomp sized thing. But if I was going to make a Kemper 2, like a follow-up to the kind of the flagship unit, it feels like the flagship unit is a stage now. I think it's the number 1 selling unit now. They're selling a lot more of those. It's expanded the Kemper market. I know they're thinking about a smaller unit than that, but they've got some challenges. I think it's just manufacturing. I think it's just, can they make it in Germany for the price that's right? You know what I mean? And so if they can't, then they have to tackle, okay, how do we make a product that seamlessly interfaces software-wise with all our releases, a product that's made somewhere else, and that we still have one master OS that's going out onto our products we make here. So, and they're a small company, you know what I mean? They're not Yamaha. So Line 6 is definitely benefiting from the, and that's Line 6's words. I talked to Line 6 guys about this, and that was, they were pretty open about like, you know, what the Helix became. Like basically they were saying they were going to release the Helix, before 2008 happened. They were working on it. And then when that whole thing happened, the economy, it was like, no, we can't take this risk. But with Yamaha's backing, they were able to probably make the unit better in terms of the hardware and in terms of getting the cost down. There's probably a lot of features on the Helix that wouldn't have existed had Line 6 not been, bought by Yamaha. And because then they didn't have to handle all the how to get stuff made, and the Yamaha had all the production line stuff and the capability set up. But anyway, I would just make a profile. I told him, why don't you just put two profilers in one bigger box? Call it a Kemper 2. It's totally independent. There's two of them. Just like put the power buttons together. You know what I mean? And sum the signals at the end. Like people would love that. That's all people want to do. Anyway. Yeah, and
then people wouldn't have to be like me and have two Kempers.
Exactly. And most people do two racks. Who do doubles and they put in a rack case. If you could just make it, 1.5, times as
for sure
as large, But I think a small unit is on their radar because I think they'll sell more of those than anything, and I know they want to grow. But they're aware of the pain points, And the thing you got to remember too is the Kemper came out at a time when they were trying really more than anything to convert amp users to a digital product. Gear that comes out today, and I think to a degree the Helix, because Line 6 has really never been in the let's convert people kind of business, like they've just been unapologetically digital from the very beginning, Here's a pod and it's the shape of a bean. What a silly idea, like that was, no one took that seriously, but we all had a pod because it was like cheap and kind of cool. And then they did a pocket pod. Like, that's not a real solution to anybody's problem. You know what I mean? Like, but it's whatever. Yeah. It's just for fun. Like, some of the products are not meant to be, so I think Line 6 didn't worry about that. But some of the design decisions on the Kemper are to be a little more everything's right in front of you, buttons, physical, tactile things, which, maybe results in more menu diving. But their thing was, we need this big EQ on the front, because we need a tube amp guy to know where the bass, middle, treble is, the gain, the volume, that sort of thing. And if I can see the signal chain, that's better than somehow hiding it behind a screen. It's a decision they made. Is it good, bad? I think it's a great piece of gear, but...
Yeah. So if they were to come out with that little Kemper, mini Kemper, whatever you want to call it, say they wouldn't do this, but say it could only hold 5 profiles on it. Put you on the spot. What would you go with?
Well, I'd go with the brand new steel string singer that probably just came out at the time that this drops. No.
There you go.
No, for me.
Plug away. I don't care.
For me, man, top profiles of all time. I think I did a video about this recently. I always forget what I do in videos, and so I'm probably not even going to say the same profile. So people always call me a liar or say I'm just like saying whatever's convenient. But whatever, my tastes change. Tweed Loman, one of those ones, depending on the guitar, one of the brighter Tweed Lomans, like B2 or B3 would be one. I really enjoy the 62 AC30 is still one of my favorites. 66 AC30 is a good one too. I might go with a Bandmaster in there, maybe something like a Twin. The Trainwreck that I recently did has become a real favorite of mine. The Z-Rec, I think, is an incredible worship amp. If you haven't tried that, by the way, you should. It's a little more aggressive, but it's got that AC30 top end on it, and people are really liking that. For the Sunday stuff, it'd be something like that. If I could only have one amp, like my own one amp, I would just take a little Princeton with a 12-inch speaker. Like maybe a Tyler.
Really?
Yeah, because if you could have one amp and it's got to be versatile, I want some American cleans, but I also want it to be able to get going. So if I could just have a pedal with it, I'd be fine. If it's got built-in verb, I'm probably good.
There's it's funny you say that, because I've actually been looking for a little Princeton just as a little grab and go amp, because you're right. They are such killer little amps. They're actually, their value is going way up right now because people are looking for those little amps. There's a guy that plays at my church. He toured, I don't know if you know Colony Houses.
Yeah, I've heard of him.
Yeah, so and they toured with Switchfoot as well. So he opens for them. Tyson, I'm not going to butcher his last name, Motzenbacher. He's a cool guy. I played with him a bunch at my church when he's not touring, but he literally brings a little Princeton, throws it on stage. You know, who cares about stage volume? And it sounds amazing every single time. And I'm like, you know what? I just need to get a Princeton.
Right.
And I'm looking at like getting a little Princeton, building a little pedal board, and I'm just going to try and go back to the basics and just
put the Helix in front of it.
Well, that's my rig. The Helix is the meat of everything. If I use the tube amps, if I use the Kempers, the Helix is my pedal board.
Yeah.
And that's what I've done forever. And I'm like, it'd be nice. I enjoy having these big knobs here to be able to just like, I want a little more gain, you know, versus having to try and find it and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, it's hilarious. We didn't even cover the main thing I wanted to talk about. We had so much to talk about. I started the video by saying, you know, what's so interesting to me is all of your experience with amps. And I wanted to get into just all of the stuff you've learned from playing all these different amps. So maybe another video at some point down the line.
We can do that. We can do an amp talk video or something for sure.
There you go.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for doing this with me and for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's fun. Super fun.
I'll put your links down in the description below so people can check them out. Everyone knows who you are. If you're on my channel, you know.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that. Not everyone knows who I am, but some people do. And no, people can find me on all the things. Just look for ToneJunkie. You try to be on all the platforms. So, yep.
And keep an eye out for the new profile pack, Steel String Singer.
Man, the Steel String Singer, depending on when this is out, there could be an... And we're working on a mystery amp. And I actually have the mystery amp. And for the super fans who are listening to this deep in, it's the most money I've ever spent on an amp. And
you spent some money on amps. So
I have spent some money. So this is the most expensive amp I've ever purchased. And... I'm excited about it because I'm trying to do something a little different with this one, you know, because I think there's a lot of versatility in it, and there's a story behind the amp, and so I want to just tell that story and focus on pulling out every tone in there, every, you know, nook and sonic cranny will be explored, you know, and I think it's gonna be great. So I'm excited to get working on that.
I look forward to playing through the Steel String Singer and that mystery amp whenever that comes out.
Yeah.
Like I've said, I'm a huge fan of your profiles. Thank you so much for all you do, not only for the Kemper stuff, but just the community you've built. The KPW Facebook group is easily the best Facebook group I've been a part of with gear related stuff. So, you're such a generous guy, obviously very generous with your time to do this with me.
Thank you, man.
And everything. And I appreciate it. So, thank you so much, man.